If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address.
I had the opportunity to join a group of people that went to Ghana for the Full Circle Festival. I had talked with my dad about being excited about going because I knew my Kenyan heritage. I'd known it from the beginning. My dad told me all those stories, right? It was undisrupted by the slave trade on the eastern coast. I was excited to go to Ghana because the remnants on the coast there of the transatlantic slave trade were something I didn't see in Kenya, and I was excited to see that. So I was talking to him about that, and he paused and he said, well, there was another slave trade that happened on the eastern coast of Africa that doesn't have a lot of history behind it because it took slaves to Asia, but they weren't allowed to procreate, and so it didn't last as long. He said, so our heritage did interact with slavery in Kenya. And I was like, well, Dad, you said it wasn't disrupted. And he says, well, the Wangas did what they had to do to survive, which meant participate in the enslavement of other Kenyans.
Wow.
Why have we made it a point to delineate ourselves? Why is it so important to stand up for our lineage and the culture that it produced and to not let anyone subsume it? People ask all the time, what's your problem with us, you niggas? As if they don't know. Well, let me go ahead and give you yet another in a mountain of examples. Now, unless you've been living under a rock for the last week, you don't need me to tell you that Essencefest has turned into Tetherfest. Essence, like so many other formerly Black American-oriented publications and businesses, has been infiltrated and at this point been turned into nothing more than a whorehouse. It is a toilet that is infested with tethers. And yes, you better believe this is white power picking and choosing who they want to win. That's where these Tethers get the funding for this nonsense from. Essence magazine is owned by a guy named Richelieu Dennis. He's a Tether from Liberia. And you could tell that the fix was in because as soon as that white media company Time Inc. sold Essence to Richelieu, you had another white media organ, the New York Times, celebrating this, claiming that Essence is once again black-owned. The white media knew exactly what was going on, but the whole thing was to get you excited about it. Oh, it's black-owned again. No, when a Tether gets their hands on something, it's black in name only. The reality happens to be it takes more than melanin to be black. Essence was already going down the toilet, but as soon as he got his grimy hands on it, that was a wrap. His first move, of course, was to bring in as many other Tethers as he could, including a Kenyan woman named Caroline Wanga. Now, this woman had been Target's DEI coordinator before this, and she's been real quiet about that ever since black activists began boycotting Target for abandoning their own DEI initiatives, which they were never sincere about, and even if they were, the only thing it was a jobs program for people like Caroline Wanga. But what a surprise, almost the moment that Wanga got put in charge of Essencefest, she immediately announced that Target would be sponsoring the event this year. The same Target that black people are boycotting. And before the Tethers and shills and bootlicks try to lie and throw up a smoke screen and say, well, Carolyn Wanga, she's been on leave for the last couple of years. You can miss me with that. If she's on leave, why the heck is she still running around being listed as the CEO of Essence Ventures? If she is indeed on leave, then she needs to formally step down, especially if she's been on leave for 2 freaking years. So no, if she's going to be on leave, then she needs to go ahead and formally resign from Essence. She needs to announce that she's walking away from the company altogether. She's leaving. She won't be an employee. She won't be an executive. She won't be anything at Essence. She's resigning. She's leaving. Now, that would eliminate any sort of confusion about her status with Essence Ventures. But of course, she hasn't done that, has she? But as long as she formally keeps listing herself as the CEO of Essence Ventures, as long as she allows people to call her that like Byron Allen's the Griot, then yeah, she's in charge, and that means this mess falls on her. If there's one thing that Tethers and their apologists like to do, is to speak with a forked tongue and try to have everything both ways. Well, it shows you that she's trying to get in good with her former employers, and from the looks of things, she'll be able to go back to Target sooner than even she thought she would. Essencefest had an honorable reputation given to it by the fact that that it is basically one of the largest, if not the largest convention that takes place in the United States on a regular basis. And I think that there's a certain righteousness to the fact that Essencefest doesn't take place in Atlanta. Look, there have historically been some good things about Atlanta, but let's be honest. There's been a lot of things wrong with the place too. It's basically become the black LGBT capital of the world. And while I'm not going to dwell on the politics of that, the reality happens to be the foundational black American culture is not the culture of the San Francisco bathhouse. That's why it makes a hell of a lot more sense that Essencefest would be centered in New Orleans. Now down there deep in the heart of the South, that old rich black soil that gave rise to so much of our culture. The things that we do in life imbue the places that we go with a certain energy. That's why whenever you go to certain places, step into certain houses, or even certain rooms inside of a house, you can feel something. Well, the same thing happens to go to places like New Orleans. There's simply no substitute for that kind of energy. It attracts things and pulls things into it. And as a result, it actually imbues these things with life and vitality and vibrancy. And that's the reason why there's a righteousness to the fact that it takes place there, in New Orleans of all places. But of course, wherever you got flowers, you also got some flies too. The Tethers in charge of Essence basically took this year as their coming out party to show their behinds. I think it's largely because of the pressure that's being put on them by the fact that we're delineating. Far as they're concerned, they don't have that much to lose by going ahead and showing their hand. I guess they figured it was only a matter of time. But what they did was to basically shoot themselves in both feet, and they showed exactly what it is that the Tethers have been doing in Africa, all of the bait and switch garbage that they were doing, all of the promises and the insults that they were creating around. This is the reason why Africa could never unite. Tether culture, unfortunately, is the dominant culture there. It's not the only thing in Africa and the Caribbean, but unfortunately, it's the dominant culture, and we do ourselves no favors by lying about that reality. The organizers of Essence made it clear that the entire reason that they bought Essence was to use it as a way to promote Tethers in the US and abroad, and that they would marginalize us in the process. That was the plan. They know that the people who go to Essencefest are foundational black Americans, and to these scumbags, that's the beauty of their little scheme. They were thinking that they were going to get us to fund our own marginalization. That was the point, to try to get us to fuel a machine that was going to try to destroy us. They would promote foreign customs and even hostile ones over us at an event that foundational black Americans created and whose purpose is to honor and magnify our culture. I won't bore you with the stories about how people went to booths and events within Essencefest only to find out that they were canceled, or to have someone tell them on the spot that there were now additional fees to get into spaces that never had additional fees before. In other words, now that the Tethers have bought it, Essencefest has become just another Nigerian scam. This is the entire reason why the Tethers have never been able to build anything like Essencefest on their own. They don't do business. Everything is a scam. Everything's a swindle. Everything's a lie. When your culture has a broken loyalty system, that's what happens. Naturally, a lot of people have been very angry with Essencefest, and they're starting to put the blame where it belongs. What that means is the message has been reaching the people. And we see how the loyal opposition have been trying to counter-program. The LGBT advocacy website The Griot, which is owned by Byron Allen, tried to put a pretty face on this fiasco and the rumors that Caroline Wanga may be on her way out now by printing some veiled threats that she posted where she called the criticism that she's been rightly receiving, quote, sensationalized slander without proof, lies without legal defense, and character concoctions that give way to conviction and correction. To a mental midget like Caroline Wanga, she may think that that kind of faux flowery prose sounds sophisticated, but in reality it sounds like pure tether babble. She went on to post, the defamation and disparagement smoke that accompanies correlating the uncorrelated ain't what anyone should want. Take heed. Ain't? Really? The message here is as obvious as it is feeble. Slander, lies without legal defense, character concoctions, and of course defamation. She's trying to push all the buttons. She's clearly worried. The only reason white power puts Tethers like Wanga on the payroll is if they can demonstrate that they have the ability to lead foundational black Americans around by the nose. That's why all these Tethers go undercover. They don't sit there and say loud and proud what they are unless there's a particular quote-unquote achievement that they think that they can wave under the nose of the next white paymaster. But ultimately they know that the less they have in common with us, the more likely we are to reject them, which is why they always try to cosplay as being us. Whenever they talk about our history, they have the nerve to say we, and us, and our. I don't have any slavery collaborators in my family tree, talking about a history and a culture they had nothing to do with. When we expose them, they become damaged goods to white power because none of us will follow them. White power doesn't need a tool that's broken, so they get discarded. That's what she's worried about. Will the white employers that she worked for and hopes to go back to see that she's radioactive now? That's the reason why she's posting these veiled legal threats. All right then, Tether, let me give you something to take heed of. First of all, it's not slander if it's true. Just because you don't like people pointing out your lineage and your own personal family history, that ain't slander. If your reputation has taken a hit, it's your own dirty actions that did it. Secondly, things like defamation are notoriously hard to prove in court. Basically, you have to get proof that the person you're accusing of defaming you lied. No one who's calling you out has been a liar. And you also have to prove that they did it intentionally, specifically for the sake of hurting your reputation with things that they knew not to be true. And finally, you have to prove damages. Many a person with more brass than brains has run off to court thinking that because someone hurt their fee-fees, that constitutes defamation, only to have a lawyer or a court later tell them that it doesn't, and that they didn't have an actual case to begin with. Sure, you can find a lawyer who will represent you in a weak case, because lawyers always need cash, and if you're dumb enough to pursue a suit like that, they'll take your money. But even they know the odds are in the single digits that you'll actually win, unless you have damning proof, which you don't. Also, part of civil litigation involves something called discovery. Discovery is where both sides are allowed to gather information on the other, including records and documents for the sake of clarifying their cases. So when you sue someone, even though they're the defendant, they have the ability to access your personal records. That's a double-edged sword. Not to mention you open yourself up to the possibility of countersuits, which means even more aggressive discovery could take place. What kind of communications has Wanga had with her white employers in the past? Why did a former employee of Target decide to make Target the sponsor of Essencefest when she knew full well that it was those very same black people who were protesting Target? Did the $1.4 trillion in FBA spending power have anything to do with that decision? What kind of assurances did she make to them? Nobody knows right now, but were there a civil suit, it would be possible to find out. She talks about smoke. She needs to be careful, because where there's smoke, there's also fire too. She potentially has far more to lose if her own emails and personal correspondence proves that she was white power's inside woman the whole time. She's not concerned about defamation. She's concerned that her ability to be useful to white power is finished. Tethers need us to survive. Unless they can remain connected to us, unless they can cling on to us, they're done. The griot tried to downplay the firestorm as being merely a thorny few days online of backlash against this year's festival. As many who attended reported having a wonderful experience, there are still quite a few raising questions around the brand's current leadership as it continues to evolve with the times. The only people who said that they had a wonderful time at Essencefest this year was Caroline Wanga and the rest of those tethers. You see how they characterize these people trying to hijack a black American festival and trying to appropriate our culture and use our $1.4 trillion in buying power to magnify themselves. They call this Essence's brand evolving with the times. Yeah, trying to bury foundational black American culture and replace it with tether culture is evolution. Over at the griot anyway. You know, if the griot had been around at the beginning of slavery or the beginning of Jim Crow, that's the way they would have described those holocausts too. Merely America evolving with the times. What Richelieu and Wanga and the rest of those scumbags are doing is not evolution, it's regression. This is dragging black people backwards. Having bootlicks and traders bastardizing and exploiting a brand that black Americans made popular so it could be a feeble springboard for their own failed opportunism is an abomination. Which explains perfectly why Byron Allen's website is boosting them, because that's what he's about too. Byron Allen's online cesspool is praising this and defending it as Essence evolving with the times. I gotta wonder how much Joloff they had to give them to publish that. But they had to mention that the conversation has been pointed where it should be, the lineage of the tethers who pulled this mess in the first place. That's what's being put front and center, and that's what got them shook. How many tethers work at the griot, we have to wonder. We already know that at least one tether worked at Target, but now it's time to look at all of these people who call themselves defending these guys, because where there's one of them, you usually find a lot more. People need to ask anyone who writes for the griot where their ancestors came from. Are they foundational black Americans or not?
Because I knew my Kenyan heritage. I'd known it from the beginning. My dad told me all those stories. He said, so our heritage did interact was slavery in Kenya, which meant participate in the enslavement of other Kenyans.
Wow.
Now, I want you to remember that word heritage. She used it more than once, didn't she? But on the griot's website, in her little post giving her veiled threats, she wrote, "My heritage, values, principles, lived life, and sense of community are a place of pride, passion, and purpose to democratize authenticity for the upliftment of all, not just some." So she says that her heritage is a place of pride. Yeah, her heritage of being from an entire family, an entire lineage of slavery collaborators. That's a sense of pride for her. She said it herself. That's her heritage. And her heritage is a place of pride for her. She's not ashamed of it. She's proud of it. And you better believe that the white powers that be that went ahead and smiled on her, they recognized a collaborator when they saw one. But just in case you think that all of this might be some coincidence, consider this. Last year, Essence's own website declared that they were going to turn Essencefest in specific into nothing more than a platform to boost their own Tether-based agenda. They said Essencefest in specific was what they were going to target. Why? Because of how many black people went to it. As Essence's website said, over 500,000 attendees daily over the 3-day event, which is the largest festival in America by per-day attendance. They're going to take Essence and use it as a vehicle to center Nigeria as the focus of their global communication strategy, not centering the black Americans who they had to crawl to for money and clout, but Nigeria, which has nothing to do with black empowerment. One of the weakest, poorest, and most demoralized places on earth. Nigeria is Tether central, we gotta be honest. And it's a joke to say that Nigeria is going to be the center of the global black world. Nigerians are fleeing Nigeria at a supersonic rate. They even have a word for it, japa. You've heard me mention it before. The word literally means to flee. How are you going to have Nigeria as a stable center of anything when everything in Nigeria is dispersing and running away? This is the problem we've always had when immigrants are sent into the black community and then try to use our money to fund their own opportunistic schemes. That's what this is. This Richelieu character is trying to do what BET and TV1 and these other bootlick operations for the white media did. Gather a black audience and then immediately pimp those black people to white corporations. We saw it with BET, then TV1 came along and they lied through their teeth and said that they were different. But no sooner than they gained a black following than they did the exact same thing. This Richelieu clown doesn't have $1.4 trillion of anything, and yet he talks as if he does. When what he means is that we, foundational black Americans, have over $1.4 trillion in buying power. If this guy wants to try to sit here and act like he's some sort of big shot, tell him to have the Liberians fund any of these ventures. Tell him that he's going to go ahead and pimp the Liberians to these white corporations. Let's see how much buying power they've got. He wants white venture capitalists and white investors to think that he's the head tether in charge and that he can lead FBAs around by the nose and get us to give our money to them. This is how the Tethers try to get in good with white power, by assuring massa that they can keep us under control. They thought that because they don't stand up for themselves that we wouldn't either. They thought that black Americans are just so eager to go to a party that they could spit in our faces, and so long as there's some music and jollof rice, we'd still show up. Well, they thought wrong. Essencefest attendance was way down, and the creeps behind it have been scrambling for cover ever since. They didn't give birth to anything new. In fact, they killed the golden goose. But then again, what else would you expect? These guys couldn't make anything pop off in their own lands. They were damned to fail here. It was so predictable. The same cast of incompetents who failed to stand Africa on its feet, who fled the continent without ever having built anything there, are now in the U.S. working their magic here, with the exact same results. Failure. The reason that centering Africa, much less Nigeria, was always damned to fail is because there's nowhere in Africa where they've been able to center being Nigerian. Name one place over there that has anything comparable to Essencefest or any other event that we established over here. How can you make Nigeria the center of black global thought and culture abroad when you fail to make Nigeria the center of Nigerian culture in Nigeria? I'm not trying to be messy or talk down to anyone, but we gotta be honest. The people you see trying to hijack black American culture and institutions utterly fail to build their own at home. They suffer from deep-seated insecurity, and there's a reason for that. They couldn't build their own institutions, so they're trying to bogart someone else's, and they think that they can keep it alive, or at least on life support, while they drain the blood from it like a parasite. Culture and traditions don't work like that. The only people who are trying to defend this fiasco are the Tethers, the dead-enders of Pan-Africanism, and of course the intersectionalists who hate anything foundational Black American, or even Black for that matter. These are people who obsess over interracial sexual access. That's their entire reason for existing. That's what intersectional means. That's the reason why everybody who talks that intersectional crap, they hate anything having to do with Black. And as far as they're concerned, the bastardizing of Essencefest and the erasure of foundational Black American culture, that's a great thing. It's a model for how all Black American culture can be dissolved and disintegrated so that we can just be people. Because in their minds, if they can deracialize themselves, they think they're going to run up to every non-Black person and try to find a way to finesse some sexual access under the claim that, oh, we're all just people, aren't we? These are the only ones who are applauding this nonsense. Tethers have no loyalty to any country, certainly not to Africa, because they fled from it. So when you hear these backstabbing bootlicks talking about centering Nigeria, they're actually talking about themselves. That's what they really mean. They're not about to do anything to build up Nigeria because they never did. This is just a clumsy front for them to talk about some half-brained consulting business, which is the main scam and hustle that a lot of these creeps like to do. That's why Caroline Wanga didn't start her own institution. She decided she would be a DEI employee for Target, and we all see how much good she did for them. They know so much about Nigeria, and they love Nigeria so much that they left Nigeria. Let's be bluntly honest here. Things like Essencefest are uniquely foundational Black American culture because only our culture could have produced it. That's not a brag, it's a fact. You look around the world, please show me where you've seen anything like it. Yes, every culture around the world has a party, but so what? The question is, do they actually have a celebration that transcends people just getting together and dancing? Because if it's not actually about culture, if it doesn't have the pulse, if it isn't something deeper than people just having a good time, then all you wind up with is people standing around dancing awkwardly to Afro beats. Culture vultures and cultural appropriators are always trying to claim that whatever we make, it wasn't really for us. They're constantly trying this pathetic revisionism of anything that we do, and that's all part of anti-Black racism. They have to do it as a way to try to legitimize the scam that they're trying to pull. So when we make a form of music, they immediately lie and claim that some white person like Rick Rubin was a pioneer of hip-hop, or some other good old boy like Elvis Presley or Jerry Lee Lewis was a pioneer of rock and roll. It's all about trying to steal what we create. This is how the powers of anti-Black racism try to bestow legitimacy on their theft. And we've seen the Tethers trying the same tactics with us, falsely claiming that New Orleans food is somehow actually Caribbean or African. They were never talking like that before. Same way they lied and claimed that hip-hop was Caribbean because Kool Herc came from there and that Africans had something to do with rap music, though they still can't tell you what. Same lies that these white supremacists tell, and it comes so easily to the bootlick to lie. The Tethers have no shame because the Tethers have no honor either. That's why they don't care about betraying us, because they didn't care about betraying their own people in Africa and the Caribbean either. If they knew how to build institutions and how to create vibrant traditions, then they would have started their own. Events that would have meant to the world what our events mean. So far, they haven't, and none of them ever will, because the Tethers took over African culture a long time ago, and as a result, they abandoned the very characteristic that would have given rise to a vibrant, self-respecting culture: pride. The Africans have been conditioned by the Tethers to not like what they see when they look in the mirror. It's been this way for over a century, and that becomes worse when you deal with a Tether. Tethers know that they're cowards and that they fled, and they also know that's what we see when we look at them too. Their jealousy eats them alive, and it shouldn't surprise you that these Tethers try to cosplay as us. That's because Tethers mirror that other anti-Black group, the white supremacists. That's who they're in league with. And just like their white supremacist masters, whenever they see us repping Blackness loud and proud, that makes them uncomfortable. It makes them afraid. White society also hates us, but they have to mirror us too, because none of them have created anything that's uniquely American. We have, because we have to, because we are a people whose origins are rooted here, in this soil. We have, in historical terms, given birth to ourselves. And that's what you see so many in white society mirroring and copying what we do while simultaneously heaping scorn on us. You want to know why they do that? Because they've spent hundreds of years telling themselves that they're better than us. That's their identity now. They are not Black. It's a negative affirmation. We are great because we're not them. And yet the vibrancy, originality, and brilliance of our culture is undeniable. And they hate that. because it makes them want to be us, the very thing that they pride themselves on not being. It exposes the total fraud of white privilege. And the Tethers have it even worse. They can't even pretend to be white. They hate being black, period. And they have no sense of pride because Tethers never built anything. They only destroy. So they try to convince themselves that they're us. You know, for many years now, I've told you about how white supremacy tries to legitimize its theft and genocide by actually using the names of the people that they wiped out. If you take a look at the United States, you see a number of places with names like Mississippi, Illinois, Manhattan. These are the names of the Native American tribes that these white supremacists wiped out. And as a result, they think that they legitimize themselves by taking on those names. I told you about Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall named after a Native American chieftain, but it got a bunch of white guys running around claiming that they're taking on the culture of the very people that they wiped out, who they swindled and ran off their own land, and the ones that they didn't run off, they killed them where they stood. And today you have a whole lot of these descendants of these colonizers who claim to be the very people that they wiped out, these $5 Indians. Well, we got a bunch of $5 FBAs running around too, these Tethers who are trying to find new and inventive ways to cosplay as us, as a means to legitimize what they're doing. And for them to be formally declaring that they're now going to try to use Essence as a platform to center the failed state they come from, that's an admission on their part that their culture is all but dead. And don't give me any crap about jollof rice. This isn't about food. This is about influence. And as a well-known FBA said, you can't fake influence. You can't fake courage either. People who flee will never fight. And if you don't ever take a stand, you're a fool to expect anyone to respect that. There's a reason the Tethers had to come here. We actually build. We actually fight. We take what little we have and we make it hot. How can you have an entire country of over 225 million people, an entire continent of nearly 1 billion people, and everyone's broke, everyone's miserable, nobody's building, everyone's trying to flee? The Tethers have made the name Nigeria synonymous with fleeing. That and scamming. How can people like Caroline Wanga and this Richelieu clown pretend that they're going to somehow be building some sort of great global African anything? You can't build a great civilization abroad until you first learn how to build one at home, and the Tethers never did that. And to center Nigeria or anywhere in Africa or the Caribbean, it would be a waste of time, because they would all have to hold their functions here because this is where the pulse is at. There's no getting around it. Tethers won't be able to replicate our success merely by hijacking a brand name and then putting out some putrid, perverted, bastardized knockoff Frankenstein monster of a convention and calling it Essencefest. Look what happened merely because people paid attention to it. They've already killed Essencefest with their own hands. What they'll be doing is desperately hoping that there's just enough dumb black folks who are naive enough to still be on the Pan-African kick and just dumb enough to spend money with scammers. They'll still be depending on us regardless. When they talk about that $1.4 trillion of buying power, they're not talking about the Liberians, the Nigerians, the Kenyans, or anyone else. They're talking about us. We are the source. The only Tethers who have any money are the ones who depend on us to get them into the United States, and there's not enough of them to start any festival of any significance, much less to keep one going. We are not just the vehicle, we're the fuel for it too. A bunch of Tethers standing around trying to talk proudly about countries they ran away from, that's a con, and no one will fall for it. So before you can tell the rest of us how great Nigeria is, you first have to convince the Nigerians to stop running and start building, at home. I would like the Africans and Caribbeans to ask themselves, how is it that 45 million foundational black Americans managed to do what over 220 million Nigerians never could? With over 5 times our population, one would think they'd have dozens of festivals and events far larger than Essencefest. They're in Africa, so you would assume that it's only natural that whatever cultural events they start would spread to other African nations, and those people would in turn gravitate to Nigeria the same way that these Tethers have gravitated to New Orleans. But Africa has failed to do this. People can feel the enthusiasm we have for what we make because it's genuine, it's real. It comes from a place of love and honesty, not from a place of connivance and opportunism. Tethers will never do what we've done because they see the world the same way white supremacy does, through the eyes of lies and scheming. White power has also tried to hijack what we created too, and they've got far more resources than the Nigerians and the other Tethers. And you know what happened? When we walked away, those little things they thought they had stolen withered and died. Without us, all the Tethers will have is a name, but it won't have the spirit. And what do you call something that doesn't have a soul? You call it a zombie, the walking dead. That's what Essence is now. It died many years ago, though it hadn't necessarily keeled over yet. But now everyone sees it's just a corpse, shuffling its way into New Orleans once a year, trying to convince the few people silly enough to show up that the corpse is still alive. But it stinks, and it's ugly, and people have gotten to the point that they can't ignore the stench any longer, and they can't pretend not to notice the maggots and rotted flesh, and you got the Tethers trying to convince people that the maggots are actually jollof rice. The Africans and Caribbean Tethers are making themselves out to be culture vultures, and this is their coming out party. These pathetic attempts to bastardize our culture and try to take platforms based on our culture and fueled by our economic dynamism and turn them into vehicles for Tethers to promote themselves, we cannot allow that, and those involved and responsible have to be held accountable for it. Okay, so the Tethers have shown us what they'll attempt to do. How can we strengthen and bolster our gatekeeping? Well, here's an idea. The events and things that we create have to be delineated as well. That means that term, FBA, Friedman, is going to have to be on those things that are created so that everybody understands this is what it's about. Part of the problem we have is that people aren't clearly identifying what is from our culture and doing it loud and proud. This gives the Tethers plenty of room to hide. Labeling is what's required here. That's the way to mark one's territory. If people stop being bashful about clearly saying who is behind this or that event, it would be a great way to keep the Tethers out. People need to know the lineage of the people behind the events and functions that they attend. People need to be asking that question too. Is this an FBA event? Ask it. If people don't know what that means, then you tell them. And if they answer proudly, yeah, this is an FBA event. This is an event from people who are of our lineage, then okay. But of course, Tethers and other infiltrators, emphasis on the traitor part, will always be offended whenever you ask that question. They'll be saying, you're being divisive. Or they'll tell you, we will get back to you niggas. We have to get back to you later. We can't tell you if this is FBA. We get back to you later, you niggas. Cultural appropriation is a form of racial warfare. It's meant to dilute, to weaken, and ultimately to eliminate the practices of the target group. As for our ethnic group, it would be good to have or develop branding as a way to protect ourselves. Remember what I told you about institutions? I know I haven't mentioned it in a while, but Professor Blacktruth's definition of an institution is a group of people who gather resources for the sake of protecting a particular idea or ideal. That's an institution. Institutions are not buildings. That's simply the place where the institution does its business. Be it a university or a bank or a church, same thing applies. It is the people and the ideas or ideals that they are working to protect and promote. That's the institution. And an institution must be defended. Not just the building, but the ideas and the ideals that they claim to stand for. That becomes a lot easier when you don't have co-opted publications like Essence that stopped being about black people in any meaningful way a long time ago running around. People didn't really want to be there. They were just going through the motions. And now they're sick of it. But what we need is about more than just having events that are our own. We also need the people behind those events to know why these events truly matter. That's how you keep a culture vibrant. That's how you keep a culture alive. That's how you make it where the culture becomes part of the people. The Tethers can't outdo us because everything they touch instantly gets turned into a scam. And Essencefest has got these Tethers shook. You can tell that these guys, the cope is on 1,000. Now, I'm not going to be shouting anybody out, but there was one Tether that I saw, and this clown was saying, whatever Nigerians touch, we take over. He was bragging about that Essencefest is an example of Nigerians taking over. These people are fleeing Nigeria by the millions. It's the second largest mass migration on the planet. Taking over? What are Nigerians or even Africans in general taking over? They have to get on rafts and sneak into somebody else's country, and when they get there, you got a lot of them who are either scamming or at best they got some little street vendor hustles. That's not taking over. The only places that you've been able to see the Tethers get anywhere is when they come to places that foundational black Americans have made safe for blackness. And here they are saying, me, I want to be let into a university. I will do anything you want. I will be your DEI coordinator. I'll do anything for you, massa. That's what they do. The Tethers can't take over because they have no creativity. They have no ideas, no work ethic, and no soul. They are a melanated reflection of the white supremacists who they partnered with. The reason they failed to make anything like Essencefest on their own in Africa is because the Tethers destroy everything they touch. They certainly did a number on Africa and the Caribbean, haven't they? And for any of these Tethers and foreign flag folks running around, I'm pointing this one straight at you. All that you Tethers have is what we made possible for you to have. What few governmental or corporate jobs you think you got is solely due to us. You have people who sit in foreign countries, sitting in houses they didn't build, with jobs they did nothing to create or earn, driving cars that no African had a hand in building or selling to you, using computers you didn't create, and then have the nerve to talk about taking over. This is the kind of magical thinking that the Tether has to engage in. They put cowardice on the same scale as courage. The Tether is the original traitor. They were the ones who have always thrown Africa's gates wide open to every invader who's ever come along. They were also the very first ones to flee at the first sign of a fight, too. They have no principles, which is why they thought nothing of selling out their own people in Africa and then taking that same backstabbing mentality everywhere else they've gone. And they have the nerve to be proud of this treasonous behavior. To them, being the rat scumbags of the world is a come-up. This fiasco about Essencefest is literally the only thing close to a win that these Tethers have had. They can't actually call it a victory for themselves, they've gotten nothing out of it, but what they claim is that because there have been foundational black Americans calling this out for how foul it is, to them, that's a win. You take a look at Liberia, take a look at Kenya, take a look at Nigeria. Who the hell is taking over there? I'll tell you who. It's the Indians, and it's the North Koreans, and the South Koreans, and the Chinese, and the Europeans, and some white Americans too. That's who's taking over. All of those colonizers, they're still in the same place that they were during colonization, and they're still living on the fat of the land while the people are living in shanties. This 50 plus years after so-called independence. These same colonial masters are freely dumping oil in the Nigerian drinking water and not giving a damn. That's who's taking over. Nigerians certainly aren't taking over the oil industry. Instead, they're fleeing. Japa Japa. You sound kind of stupid saying that you take over things when you haven't even taken over your own country. Everybody else walks in and runs you out. Doesn't that make you feel ashamed? Well, in order to feel shame, you would first have to have a sense of honor. How can you run from every single fight your entire life and not see a coward? Make no mistake, everyone else does. The Koreans are literally whipping the Africans in their own country and very rarely facing any sort of pushback. They're the ones taking over. And meanwhile, we got Tethers online who just took off. Consider this. How many African American billionaires are there? According to Forbes, at least 14. Now, how many Nigerian billionaires are there by comparison? Only 4. Now, how does a population that's only 1/5 the population of Nigeria manage to produce over 3 times the number of billionaires? How is that possible if Nigerians are taking over? Name for me even one Nigerian bank in Nigeria. Do Nigerians own any banks? Do they own a stock exchange? Do they own any heavy industries such as mining? The same white colonizers who raped Nigeria for its resources are still over there today taking what they want with impunity, while the people live in slums. This is the reason that we had to delineate, because for the last 50 plus years we've had a steady flow of Tethers coming in, and they've been undermining and deranging our internal politics the exact same way that they did to their own people in Africa and the Caribbean. This is the reason that the African diaspora can't hold their heads up high. We have many honorable African and Caribbean immigrants among us, many of them you see in our comment section here. But they've been robbed of their honor by the backstabbers who made those places into the basket cases they are today. Sadly, the Tethers and those in Africa and the Caribbean with that mindset are the majority in those lands. That's just the reality. What has to happen is that the on-code African and Caribbean family must bring about a complete decoupling of themselves from these Tethers. They have to speak up for their culture and say it loud. These things have been said behind the scenes in private. But it's way past time these things were said out in the open. If you want to break the Tethers' backs, you have to show that you have the spine to stand up to them. For some of you among the black immigrants, this is daunting because you've been conditioned to think that it's an awkward conversation. Well, is it more awkward than having to leave your home because the Tethers undermine you economically, politically, and socially? Is it more awkward than that? The Tethers and their ideological kin are not giants. They're not Hercules. They're weak, which is why they've spent decades sucking up to any and everyone who they thought would help them to overthrow the legitimate African and Caribbean cultures in their own lands. Betraying their own is literally the Tethers' family business. That's the reason why I showed you the video that Brother Tariq posted of the video of Carolyn Wanga admitting that her family was involved in the East African slave trade. She admitted it with her own mouth. This snaggle-toothed Tether admitted that she comes from a family of traitors. The Tether has a scavenger mindset. They certainly don't have the entrepreneurial mindset or even the hustler mindset. Nobody has ever talked about what they learned from a Tether. Now, these African countries should have been finding out who the collaborators were in their midst, the ones who took part in the greatest crime in human history, the crime that opened the door wide for colonialism, and then act appropriately. Some silly Negroes actually ask why the Africans did nothing to get their people back when they got snatched up in the slave trade. These people didn't do anything to punish the turncoats in their own lands. What the hell makes you think they're going to be trying to help anybody else? And they know what they did. The people who collaborated with the East African and West African slave trades, they know who they are. And their people know it too. They've been independent for decades, and yet in all that time, these countries haven't had the pride to punish the turncoats among them. But then again, those same Africans have done absolutely nothing to punish the colonizers either, and this after independence. The Kenyans, the Nigerians, and everyone else should have been all over anyone who came from the lineage of treason, but instead they either did nothing or worse, they actually celebrate creeps like this. And that's why we had to delineate. There was no other way. We're built different, too different. And that's the problem. When it comes to justice, when it comes to power, we don't share any common ground. We're looking for ways to empower ourselves. But the Tethers are only looking for ways to weaken black people, not just in the US, but worldwide. The Africans and the Caribbeans have a moral obligation to separate themselves from the traders, but that didn't happen. And that's the reason why we're doing it. It also demonstrates that we're not cut from the same cloth. This is the reason why Pan-Africanism was always damned to fail. We assumed that because we always had a spine and that we always fought, that surely the rest of the black diaspora who had far greater numbers and allegedly had control of their own countries, that they were also fighters too, but that's just not true. Yes, there were some true soldiers out there, and we have a number of them here, but we gotta be honest, they're the minority. And these same Tethers are the ones talking about taking over. Who are you trying to fool? The Tethers have always grabbed the ankles and spread them wide for every gang of anti-black racists who have ever come into their midst. And if buying Essence magazine is your definition of taking over, then that goes to show you don't know what power is. Because foundational black Americans have already crippled your bastardized Essence brand. And we did it without white media having to put the word out. We merely talked amongst ourselves, and now Essence is damaged goods. We know our history, and the Tethers, they know their history too. It's a putrid record of betrayal, backstabbing, turning on their own, and then lying every day about it ever since. That's why they hate us. We have a record of fighting and winning. They have a record of fleeing. Instead of fighting the invaders, they bowed down and ran away and sold their own folks out. And they didn't do it for survival. That's another Tether lie. They did it to get rid of people who opposed them. They did it to get a few shekels or a few trinkets from the Europeans or the Arabs. Don't let them tell that lie that, well, it was about survival. Like everything else the Tether says, that's a lie. It was about them trying to have a come up at someone else's expense. That's the one thing that's constant about the Tether. So you want to know why they bring a mentality of dirtbag behavior with them? This is the reason why. It's the family business for them. Remember when I told you that there's no substitute for the cultural and moral legitimacy that we represent? That's why white power had to acquire Essence and then front-load it with Tethers and bootlicks, in the hopes that people would ignore who and what these people are and think that they are us. They hoped that nobody would ever ask any questions, but of course, the Tethers being who and what they are, eventually they always screw it up because that's what they do. If the Africans want to center Nigeria, then let them do it. Over there. This is not Nigeria, and it's not Liberia or Kenya either. And that's fine, so long as all of us have mutual respect, but the Tethers don't respect anything, not even themselves. They want Essence, they can have it. The black media told you for nearly 20 years that Essence and those other publications had become whorehouses to anti-black racism a long time ago. They pushed gender-warring, so-called alternative lifestyles, and now they're revealing that they've always been a den of Tethers. I'm glad that people are recognizing this fact and calling it out. It means the message of the black media is resonating. People are starting to understand that lineage matters. When they see janky stuff happening, they're starting to ask questions about who's behind it. And you notice that that was the very first question that was asked. Sure, Byron Allen's little online rags can try to pretend as if, well, this is a small thing. Yeah, that's what they always do right before they hit the alarms and say, all right, then we got to find a way to shut these guys down. All these black media types are making too much mess for us. They're putting too much heat on us. You're damn right we are. And we're just getting started. The black media is helping our people to politically mature and become savvy. Seeing a black face isn't enough. We need to know their lineage. People's paperwork is going to get checked. Tethers are freaking out and calling this xenophobia. Again, using another word they don't know the meaning of. What's got them shook is that now enough people are finally saying what we've been saying. They're calling out the Tethers, and that means not only are there going to be damaged goods for their white paymasters, but all of this mess about, I am going to be going to this university or getting a job with this white company, and they are going to springboard me over you niggas. Oh, that little hustle is going to be running dry too. White power is who's been holding these guys up. They've been suspended in mid-air by white supremacy. But white supremacy has never liked them and certainly never respected them and didn't want them around. And as soon as white supremacy sees loudly and clearly, okay, we've gotten as much mileage out of these Tethers as we're going to get, then they too will be completely and thoroughly broken. The same way that you see all of those anti-immigrant protests and even riots in places like Britain and elsewhere, who do you think that they're angry at? Who do you think that those white supremacists over there are rioting about? They're rioting about the African immigrants who have been showing up. Oh, sure, they'll say a couple of hoots and hollers about Muslims here and there. But when it came time to actually tear up places in Britain, it was black immigrants who they claimed was the reason for their outrage. But as for Richelieu and Wanga and others, this is their wake-up call. This is the twilight of the Tethers. Just like everything else they've touched, they've destroyed this too. But then again, that's what Tethers do. We're not going to let them destroy us, though. And as for any other black folks who think to themselves that perhaps Essence can be resurrected, let it go. Once these things have been contaminated, it is time to throw them in the ash heap of history and be done with them. We are going to teach everybody a lesson. Without us, Essence doesn't have any. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Roxanne Allen, Terrence Gaines, Billionaire 718, Jonathan Maynor, and Tommy Robinson. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.